Let's talk about cellular respiration. So this is cellular respiration. It's exactly opposite pathway from like photosynthesis, but it happens in mitochondria. What actually happens is that this is a food that we consume, like glucose, is sugar. Glucose will lose electron, okay, and it's gonna become oxidized. If it loses electron, it becomes oxidized. If it gains electron, it's gonna get reduced. Who's gonna pick up those electrons at the end? Oxygen gas will pick up the electron that actually came from glucose molecules, and it's gonna get reduced into water. So this is the overall reaction of cellular respiration. Glucose will lose electron and it's going to give it to oxygen, and oxygen is going to pick up those electrons and turn itself into water. And when all glucose molecule loses electron, it's going to lose most of its energy, and it's going to use the cell is going to use that amount of energy to convert ADP into ATP. And when it loses all the electron, it's going to become carbon dioxide, and that's what we breathe out. All right, so this is the overall reaction formula for cellular respiration. Let's go over what actually happens in a nutshell. So this is just the overview of cellular respiration. Well, if you want to think about big picture, it's going to have three parts: glycolysis, citric acid cycle, and ETC, or oxidative phosphorylation. But there's an intermediate part, so you could actually subdivide everything into four parts. You got pyruvate oxidation here. All right, so this is just an overview. So you start with glycolysis. Okay, it happens you have to know the place where it happens. Still inside the cell, but it's outside of the mitochondria, a place called cytosol. So during glycolysis, what happens is that glucose will break itself into two pyruvates. Okay, we have two pyruvates here. And then let's keep the carbon numbers here. Glucose is 6 carbon molecule. Each pyruvate is 3 carbon molecule. Okay, it makes sense. We didn't lose any carbons yet, but it's gonna have 2 pyruvates. Now, meanwhile, I'm going to talk more depth in glycolysis portion. You're going to make some ATP. Number-wise, don't worry about it right now. And each pyruvate, when there's oxygen available, if there's no oxygen, it's going to go into fermentation. But when there's plenty of oxygen, that pyruvate will actually go into the matrix of the innermost side of the inside of the mitochondria there. And while it's going in, it's going to lose, for one pyruvate, it's going to lose one carbon is in form of a carbon dioxide. That's what we breathe out. Okay. And then it's going to turn itself into acetyl-CoA. That's 2 carbon molecule. Okay. And meets up with a 4 carbon molecule, oxaloacetate. Don't worry about that. And it's going to participate in this citric acid cycle. Okay. So when 2 carbon acetyl-CoA meets up with 4 carbon molecule, it's going to turn itself into 6 carbon citric acid, thus the name citric acid cycle. AKA, it's got another name called Krebs cycle. But to complete the cycle, 6 carbon must come back to 4 carbon, right? So it's going to lose 2 carbon dioxide. All right, during the citric acid cycle here, or Krebs cycle. And you're going to make some ATP, okay, meanwhile. And during all these process, NAD plus will get reduced into NADH by picking up electrons from these sugar molecules here, okay, these carbon molecules. And you get some NADH produced here, and you have a lot of NADH and FADH to the energy carriers here, okay, they pick up electron. And where they're all gonna go is the inner membrane here, okay, to do ETC, or electron transport chain system. Okay, this is where most of the ATP from glucose is made. Now, if you make ATP or phosphorylate ADP into ATP using like a what is it, enzyme, where ADP and inorganic phosphate is a substrate for that enzyme, you call that substrate level phosphorylation. And it happens in glycolysis when they make ATP, and it happens in Krebs cycle. Okay, so know that substrate level phosphorylation is when ADP and inorganic phosphate, these are the substrates of that enzyme. Okay, well, for easier to memorize, this is whenever an enzyme works to make ATP, it's called substrate level phosphorylation. And here, it's because of the gradient between, like you have a, you're gonna learn this later. You have a lot of H pluses here in the intermembrane space here, and less H plus inside the, like inside you have less here, but like where it's orange colored, you have a lot of protons here. So we just created a gradient, and using that gradient power, it wants to come in, rush in, and using that power, charging up ADP into ATP, you call that oxidative phosphorylation. Okay, so this is just the overview of the cellular respiration, and I'll see you in the next video.